Okay. Welcome everyone to our monthly transmission. It is November. Holy crap. Who here felt the shift in energy? Yeah, awesome. Okay. I'm not alone on that. Yeah, I definitely felt like a big whoosh kind of move a lot through um a lightning in some ways, right? So we're going to talk about that today. And I just want to take a minute before we jump into all that came through to just take a moment and shut our eyes and let's just land our bodies. We've been in a super active month. October was wild, good riddance. So just make sure that you have your ankles, or I'm sorry, the flats of your feet on the bottom of the floor. Really try and let your legs just rest into the ground. And just take some deep natural breaths into your body at your own pace. Just welcome yourself to this space. So honored to have you all here. Blessings on the month of November. We made it. So really just feel into the parts of your body that are touching something. The seat, the floor, your legs. See if you can sink deeper in the next breath. Let your belly fall out of your pants. Your shoulders just melt. Give your hands like a little shake. Maybe flick your fingers. Lots of energy. Let's keep it moving. Okay. That feels good. That feels like a good start. Welcome. So I want to begin this with oh. So for those of us that were here last time, there was a lot of big energy that was kind of coming into our world. And I think there was a lot that was shown to us, revealed to us. And one of the words that came through in that time was really this unbinding, this sense that we were unbinding ourselves from certain stories or ideas or belief systems, wounds, you name it, right? The things that we've carried with us. We've been kind of unwrapping these really long red ribbons. And I really felt that in October, right? This just like finding all the bloodlines back into the things that have been kind of festering. It was very much a month of death. And so going into November and feeling this kind of flush of energy move through, it was so beautiful because the first piece that really wanted to come through and speak were the waters, the healing waters, wild waters. To really move the energy, the waters bring the energy through, they bring the healing. And as we know, what helps things heal is movement, right? That's why it helps us to move our bodies, move our breath, move ourselves. We have to feel these waves in order to fully complete them. So there's a lot of water coming into our world right now. And I received a very timely message yesterday as I was taking a good friend of mine who's been in town to the airport early in the morning. And we're driving through Old Town Alexandria, which is right below Washington, D.C., for those who don't know or are not from here. And there was this white car in front of me. And the license plate was so beautiful. It just said, my ark, ARK. And I stared at it. It was in front of us for a good 10 minutes. I kept thinking to myself, like, take a photo of this. This seems like interesting. And we didn't, I just kind of stayed with the moment, but there it was right in front of me. And so today, when the first piece that came through, ding dong, the waters are here. I had to stop and I was like, oh, I knew things were getting biblical around here. I fucking knew it. So, and I immediately asked her about that. I was like, were you trying to speak yesterday? Was that you? And they said, yes, that was us. Now, I want to talk about what it means to be in a time of water, because there's a lot in our world that needs healing right now, but it also needs to be seen, right? The waters flush things. There's already things that are being flushed, emerging. So we can think of this almost as in like a flushing of a wound. And so to be with these waters right now in all the ways, and they were very clear that they were like, yeah, we entering the time of water, biblical waters, flooding, sea levels rising, right? Things are happening. And this flooding of the healing that we are welcoming into our world right now, that we are making space for. So we are really walking with this. And how prescient, right, that things are unfolding as they are in Gaza, right? This site of so much wounding, original wounding, biblical level wounding, holding all the archetypes and stories, right, that have been weaving their way, these like red ribbons, into our psyche, into humanity. So it makes sense that the ark is here for us, right? And it's not necessarily a physical vessel so much as it is a psychic one, but more than that, actually, because what they told me that the ark represents, right? So I was like, well, is it a boat? And they said, no, the ark is more a living ecosystem. The ark represents what is needed, right? In a system, right? We can think of that as community. We could think of that as family, but we're going to continue to actually expand and redefine what that really means to us as humans, because that's one of the tasks of this moment, is to really look at that. What living ecosystem surrounds you? Are you a part of? What communities feed into that? What connections are there that nourish and sustain you? What resources are present in these, right, these constellations? And I keep seeing it as like a 3D, right? Because we are in a moment of really not only creating new structures like this, new kinds of constellations, but we're actually recreating them, right? We're taking these ideas, these ancestral ideas, these ways, these old ways, and we're recreating them for ourselves now. And it was interesting because what they told me was that, they were like, remember the pods in COVID? People started podding up and they were like, that was a prototype. That was a way of being that is actually very helpful for you in this time, for humans. And they were very clear in that it's not about isolating yourself against the world, but to actually start seeing yourself and who you are woven with, who you choose to constellate with, as a futuristic kind of organism. We are all cells in this larger body of humanity. And we are also, right, like nodes in this map for the people that we are connected to, that we are walking with. So a big message that is here for us right now is that a lot is going to be kind of excavated. There's going to be a lot of upheaval because fundamentally we are reorganizing what it means to be in community, to be in connection, and to resource one another at multiple levels through those connections. The true purpose of an arc symbolically is regeneration. It contains all that is needed to regenerate a world. And this motif of regenerate, or sorry, this motif of an arc, of a boat, of a vessel that contains, right, all of these ingredients, it enters human consciousness at key timelines to plant the seeds of regeneration. So when we start noticing like the stories, the biblical stories, the big stories starting to surface in our world, in our consciousness, there's a reason. They're pointing to something, right? The ancient people, the oral histories of many, many people were embedded in stories and archetypal tales. And so when that becomes really alive and activated in a culture, in a society at a given moment, it's trying to tell us something. The story is shifting. So I really love this because I think it is between two extremes, right? We live inside of this virtual space where you can access anyone, everything. And yet we have limits, we have needs, we have, right? We need to have things locally. And that was another thing that they really emphasized, was that at different scales of organization, different constellations are necessary. So how it looks in these sort of like micro to macro constellations that you are an organism within, you might find that there are different structures that emerge, right? In the family, in your polycule, and your community, at your church, whatever those communities, right? So it's really, the two words that they kept coming back to were regeneration and reorganization. They go hand in hand. You can't build a new story out of the old ingredients. I mean, you can, but you need to change something. How they're combined, what kind of cooking style, right? Like there must be a shift in the recipe. And that's actually what makes compost, right? Things break down as we start to move them and shift them and find new ways through them. So this is some biblical level shit, but it doesn't need to be devastating. It will be what it is. Absolutely. I don't want to say what it is or what it isn't. That's for us to live and experience and decide along the way. But we are confronting the wound of the original division. And it will, like, we are going to be supported in what is needed to shift us, to shift that story. So it is a time of organizing your resources, thinking about how you are resourced, who resources you, how, what do you need, how do you pollinate? Look at how nature does it. How does nature build thriving ecosystems? And each one is different, right? There's many, many, many different kinds of ecosystems that sustain life. So as a friend and I were joking the other day, there's 7 billion paths to awakening. So every single path is valid, but we still must confront it. We still must choose it. We still must do it. So I think there's a huge opportunity for us right now. Now that takes me to the next piece, which is the spirit of the wild. We love the spirit of the wild. We are the spirit of the wild. It's part of our breath, right? It's part of our birthright. And if y'all know me, you know I love the feral. So every time the wild speaks, it's like, yes. Now, there is a reclaiming of a primordial consciousness right now. I see this in a lot of places, and that's not just because I hang out in like feral, third spaces or whatever. It's trending. And that's because it is a time to remember. We must remember, and we are remembering. And part of this is we are in a time where there's a lot of brokenness, right? A lot of ideas of brokenness, a lot of fracturing of connection, a lot of fracturing of relationship to place, rootlessness. So there are many of us in the West, in white cultures, right? And older cultures as well, who have been broken down along the way. There is a rootlessness that is very pervasive in our world, and that makes it easy to escape our responsibility, to escape that relationship in a way, because we don't feel beholden to it. We don't feel that we are stewards of it. But I really want to emphasize that it is not about being inside of a quote unquote lineage or tradition or having land or knowing where your ancestors lived. None of that is necessarily necessary to remember. And the blood of your ancient people runs in your veins. You have inherited memories. You have these connections. So part of what the land can help us do, even if it is not our ancestral land or our native land, is that it still can give us connection, because all of our ancestors were nature worshiping pagans at some point, all of them. And I'm sure that there are people who disagree, and that's okay. But I will say that that is one of our most primordial pathways back into remembrance is land, connection with land, relationship with land. And you can form that at any time. You can have that. So in that, all information, all wisdom, all energy that has ever occurred on this planet is metabolized in the ground, in the dirt. When you really think about it, everything that ever was, is, or will be has broken down to create the substrate for everything else. And so this one's really interesting, this message, because it's what I notice is because of this rootlessness, maybe because of other things, there's a lot of people in our world that want to go up, that want to escape upwards, ascension, this externalization of source energy, this idea that it's somewhere up here or further down the path. And the spirit of the wild says nah to that, because the way I feel it is, imagine a raindrop heading towards the ocean. And when it hits the top of the water, it doesn't disappear. The energy of that raindrop continues dropping, almost like an invisible anchor into the water, a sinking into. And that is the energy, the actual energy of remembrance is a sinking into. It's like a descent almost along like your energetic spinal cord, right? Like there's a falling back into it versus a leaning forward to grasp it. And it is here, right? Because it's, when you think about that sinking back, it's very like, almost like child. There's a loss of control, a loss of the gripping, a loss of the reaching. And instead you can only just, trust fall into a knowing. So it's really hard to be human sometimes and not want to reach for it, want to grasp it, want to know, want to control. But we are being asked to do the opposite in a way. And what I was told is that this will be helpful, for one, because the human brain is still very limited. It's a magical, marvelous, wondrous thing, but the way that we utilize it is very limiting. This idea that we hold all the answers, that we need to create strategy or solutions, right? When you sink back into, there's a trusting of time. And that was the other piece that they are kind of bringing into this picture, because it's a very embodied, felt sense that they're trying to communicate. I hope that's coming through. But in the Chronos time, Chronos is, one of my teachers refers to it as government time. It's this idea of like, we need an agreement that, we're going to meet at 1 p.m. midday. So we use 1 p.m. That's Chronos. It's very chronological. But then there's kairos time. And kairos time is time that is measured in moments versus minutes. And Chronos has a sense of, it's always kind of moving ahead of us, right? We're kind of having to keep up with it. Versus kairos is very, when time and space intersect and you are ready to receive the information there for you, it enters. You are able to grasp it. It might have been right in front of you all along, but suddenly it integrates and makes sense. And so I bring that up because there's this idea of God that I think is getting kind of redefined right now in our culture. If I were to kind of like, put a fine point on it, but I don't, that isn't what was explicitly said, right? But it feels like there's this redefinition almost of divinity. And how do we connect with it? A shifting down, a downshift, right? Out of the idea of supremacy, which to me, there can be a time supremacy. And instead allowing an allowance, a sinking into that just lets the things bubble up in their perfect moment. So it's a tricky thing. There isn't anything to reach for necessarily, but rather something to fall back into, a remembering. And the other thing they really wanted to say, and I really love this image, presence creates gravity. And when you have a deep center of gravity, things come to you, right? We pull in that kind of kairos way, like a black hole. We have an energetic field that then starts to move things that are in alignment with that frequency. So there's a presence that is not about reaching or externalizing or even seeking, but sinking so deep, right? That invisible anchor into the bottomless ocean. And they were saying that this is what happened to the Buddha, right? He sits under the tree and like the apple falls. It's because the center of gravity was just so, it was in the earth. And so kind of the moral of that little fable is that the Buddha's deep presence, deep listening, deep connection with this field is what awakened him, not escaping the earthly body, not, you know, going far out on plant medicines. It was literally just developing that depth of gravity. And so I really invite us all to sit with that, to sit with a sense of deepening, falling back into remembrance, a sinking into like the dirt of God. Yeah, so this was a very like heady philosophical divination. Like they're really doing a lot of cleansing here, a lot of kind of tinkering that let's kind of move this around, hose that off, flush that, because there's a lot. Sometimes the greatest ritual is not necessarily doing anything, but finding a thing to do that helps you rearrange your perception. So in other words, ritual is a way that brings us into congruency, that gets us out of a way of doing or seeing or being that is inherently limiting. But sometimes the ritual itself is just to get us into place. So what I feel coming through in a lot of these messages is how to kind of give you the framework for thinking about things slightly differently. Now, kind of moving from that idea of like the sinking into, right? A sinking into God. They wanted to talk about power and reality distortions. Now, I consider a reality distortion something that is, it happens a lot with codependency, right? Where we live inside of another person's reality, which is a way of controlling it or trying to, right? Instead of our reality, our truth, right? Our congruence. It's like we come outside of ourselves to try and live inside of a story or someone else's idea or a role that keeps us safe. So distortions of reality are ways that we, you could say, sort of self-betray. It's like live in the both and, but in a way that isn't quite of service. And we have a lot of distortions that run really rampant in the West, like in America in particular. So many, right? There's media distortions. There's the ideas of what is power, you know, so many. I won't go into them, but what they were talking about is this distorted concept of power is really about accumulation of something, right? Wealth, resources, influence, access, etc., and so on. Again, this idea of reaching outward for something to consume, to bring in, to have. And again, this is a disconnection from God in search of God, if that makes any sense. It's like we're wanting something to feel greater than, to do more, to expand, to have more. And yet at the same time, it's like losing sight of the truth of what that connection brings us. So there's a reminder right now that you are not broken. You are not broken. And this idea that we need to reach outside of ourselves to fix, right, to try and control something is not serving us, because that reaching presumes that there is something else that's going to fix it and that there is a brokenness. And so it's like they're asking us to consider, where are the reality distortions in your world? Because they are pointing back to a distortion in a belief about yourself, right? A false sense of brokenness in you. And this is the opportunity to investigate, to come back into wholeness. Like, what a beautiful month, right? This idea of like so much being shed, released, dying, so that it's almost like we can see the whole of it again. So right now, it's really important that you trust yourself. And really listen deeply to yourself. And remove things from your world that distort yourself, so that you can feel more whole and be more whole. So they didn't really give me a lot of rituals except for one, which is one of the hardest rituals I've ever heard. But I'm really excited to share it because it's been inspiring me. And, you know, all of this is really kind of coming down to this last point, which is it's time to shed. We are not fully done with that yet. And it will continue. There's a lot in our world right now, again, coming back to this sense of unbinding. Some of these ribbons are super long and deep. Some of them have real like sticky little hooks. So if you have been unwinding some some bindings, stay with it. Continue to honor what is happening, honor the cycle of shedding. And one thing they were saying, they're like, here's a really easy way to assist this process. And I was like, say more. So you tell me how you feel about their answer. They said, be completely honest and tell the truth for 1 month. I saw some looks. That means no half lies, no embellishments, no leaving things out. It's not a free pass to be ruthless and brutal, but yeah, it's a big commitment. And what they were saying is that if you tell it now and tell it like it is, you are assisting the energy of the water in moving what is not for you out of your life, recalibrating what is for you that needs adjustment, and just generally cleaning and soothing and purifying your heart within your interactions. So this is something I'm actually committed to doing this month, because I do my best to not tell lies, but I do notice there's times where it's like, oh, I might not tell the whole truth, or I might wait to tell the truth until it's no longer as painful or what have you. So, but what would happen? What could happen? What might just naturally shed itself as you stood that deeply in your truth and in your trust of yourself. You wouldn't be so reliant on the external things. You wouldn't be reaching so much. These are just my assumptions, but what I'm seeing as I kind of tie this whole together, which is like, oh, these all sort of feed into one another and support the greater healing, which I do feel is happening. And there isn't going to be a one size fits all fix because nothing is broken, even if everything feels broken right now. A greater whole is trying to find itself again. And that is our task, to assist with that in whatever way we are being shown, right? So let those answers bubble up for you. Allow yourself to like be carried by the kairos time. If you can, it might not be possible every day, all day. But there's a lot here that's trying to give you some ways of moving in the world that are going to be really supportive right now. So I'm going to leave that there, and I will pause the recording so we can have some just like deep personal sharing, and we'll take it from there.